you better be careful about the stories that you're telling it on a daily basis. Because your brain is really, really powerful. And it picks up on those stories, and it lives those stories. So what is your story? What's the story that you're telling yourself about who you are and how you show up in the world? Well, hands down, my favorite experiment of all time is this. They took a group of housekeepers, and they split them into two different conditions. In this condition, they told the housekeepers, hey, do you know that when you're cleaning, you're meeting the Surgeon General's requirement for exercise? In this condition, they told them nothing. But that was the only difference between the two groups. They all wore these nifty-difty wristwatches which tracked exertion, heart rate, steps. All of that is factored out of the analysis. And yet, after 4 weeks' time, there's a massive difference between the two groups. The group that was simply told that they were meeting the Surgeon General's requirement for exercise, lower weight, lower blood pressure, lower body fat, lower waist to hip ratio, and a lower body mass index. Y'all, I read that study and I was like, you are an athlete. Not supposed to laugh at that. Yeah, of course. I'm like, yeah, you're an athlete, you're smart, you're funny, you're all these things, and I'm like, I'm also a skeptic. And they missed something here. There's no way that the only difference between these two groups was mindset. No way. So I dig into the research, and you know what I find? More research that supports this. And then I find more research that supports this, and ultimately I get to do some research that supports this. And I'm forced to come to the conclusion that we are a bit too dismissive of the placebo effect. Oh, well, that's just the story that your brain is telling. Yup. Turns out it's real powerful. It's one of the reasons we're in the middle of a pharmaceutical crisis in this country right now. Because in order to get a drug past the next level of testing, it has to meet a 90% efficacy rating. That's good. You want your pharmaceuticals to work, yeah? The trouble is, placebos typically come in right at about 80% efficacy. You guys, that is not a whole lot of difference between a biologically active substance and what your brain believes is a biologically active substance. So what story are you telling yourself? Listen for a second. What's going on in that head? Because if you haven't trained it, you're falling into that zombie place where you're having a whole lot of ant infestations. It is our job to train our brains to smush those ants. And you know what we're going to replace them with? Pets. The cute fuzzies. Obviously. Practice enlightened thoughts. Now listen, this sounds cheesy, but the science is there. Practice enlightened thoughts don't just show up the way ants do. Ants show up to picnics automatically. Practice enlightened thoughts are like pets in the real world. They take more work. But it turns out, remember Stuart Smalley, SNL character from the 1990s? I'm good enough. I'm smart enough. There it is. He had something figured out. Because these positive affirmations that we joke about, that we laugh about, that we make fun of, increase our wealth, increase our health, increase our longevity. And what? That takes 5 seconds looking in the mirror. So here are the 3 ants that I want you to replace. If you take nothing else from this talk, this is what I want you to do. One of the big ants that people have, I'm a failure, right? We talked about it from the very start. I'm a failure. Cool, where does that get you? Sitting in the corner somewhere, feeling bad for yourself. There's no action there, right? So what do we replace this with? Oh, I'm just not ready yet. Look, if I want to be a race car driver, great. I'm not ready yet. What's the next thing I need to do? This next automatic negative thought breaks my heart more than any other. I actually get choked up every time I say it. Because I don't know a single person that doesn't have this on repeat in their heads. Are you ready for it? I'm not worthy. I'm not enough. This is the rejection ant. It says, you don't belong. You're not good enough. We got to smush that sucker. Because I don't know a single person that has paused long enough to ask themselves this question. Ready? For whom? Who are you trying to be worthy for? For a parent, spouse, sibling, boss, child? For whom? If you are not enough for yourself, guess what? If you're going to reject yourself and expect others to accept you, how does that work? Be willing to step in knowing you are enough as you are. And last but not least, it's a snake! I told you I'd come back to snakes. We're going to solve this right now. Are you ready? Here's how we're going to change that. It's a snake. I realize it's the same word. It's not a mistake. Here's the magic. When you are under fear, stress, anxiety, your brain releases a fairly complex hormonal cocktail of cortisol and dopamine and adrenaline. And when you are excited, your brain releases the identical hormonal cocktail. So your body is having an experience. And the only difference between a stress response and one where you're excited happens here. How are you interpreting that response? Are you having an adventure or are you having an ordeal? Most people get in trouble with stress because they try to control that roller coaster. Guess what? You don't get to control the roller coaster. You're on that ride that is called life, baby. How many of you got to control coronavirus this year? That's funny. Nope. How many of you get to control anybody else's actions or how they feel about you? Nope. The one thing you get to control is whether or not that ride is going to be an adventure or an ordeal.